Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Hardwood Hoops podcast. This is episode 21. Unfortunately, Ben can't be with us today, but we're delighted to announce that we're joined by Joe Hulbert, who writes for SB Nation. How you doing, Joe?
I'm good, yeah. Really enjoying these playoffs. How about yourself?
Yeah, all good, thanks. Yeah, I'm not enjoying so many late nights with work, but I've definitely enjoyed the basketball. It's been good standard so far, hasn't it?
Yeah, I've really enjoyed the bubble, to be honest, because it takes all the it just comes down to basketball. There's no there's no real home advantage. It's just you're seeing who's the best basketball team rather than who's got the most intimidating atmosphere behind them.
Yeah, definitely. I think some of the offensive quality has been better as well, hasn't it? Because you haven't got these players playing like 40 minutes and then having to get on a plane and travel across the country. They can just walk back to their hotel room. So we've seen some better offensive performances, I think.
Oh yeah, 100%. I think we're seeing players play with a little bit more freedom as well. I think there's been less isolation in these playoffs than I've seen in past ones. Probably because the players are fresher, which means they can move off ball a little bit more. Yeah, I've really enjoyed the quality of the basketball.
Yeah, no clear. Well, some people may think so, but no clear favourite like we've had in the East and West for like the last 5 years as well. So it's been a bit more hit and miss, which we'll go on to talk about some of the series in a minute. But first of all, I just want to ask how you yourself got into the NBA. Obviously, not the most popular sport in the UK, but it's growing. How did you get into it, and how did you get into doing the writing you're doing at the moment?
So between 2008 and 2012, I lived in New York. So I became a fan of the NBA right at the end of my stay there. I wasn't into it between 2008 and 2011. It was actually quite. I know the Knicks and fun don't really go in the same sentence, but when I was there and just getting into it, the Knicks were fun because they just traded for Carmelo Anthony. So obviously in my classes, everyone was talking about, the Knicks have traded for Carmelo Anthony, Danilo Gallinari's gone, Raymond Felton's gone, etc. So it kind of piqued my interest, and the way I've actually gotten into every US sport is via fantasy sports. So there just happened to be a spot going in one of my friend's fantasy leagues. So I joined it and I actually won the league in my first year, mainly because I had someone in my ear telling me who to take. So from there, I started watching the games. I remember I had Kevin Durant and Rajon Rondo in my team, so I watched a lot of Celtics and Thunder. From there, I kind of started interacting with guys in the UK community. Then in 2014, I joined Double Clutch, if you know them, with Matt, Mike, Hugh, and the other guys. I joined them. I was just really writing sort of game recaps at first, making the odd guest appearance, but then I took up a bigger role. And the big break for me was I got offered to cover the Miami Heat for Hoops Habit. So I think that was kind of my key. I think that's the key for anyone, to be honest, is find a team to cover. It's very hard to break forward just being a general NBA writer. I think you've got to have a team, and that's how you build a following. But yeah, so I covered the Heat. Then I moved on. I worked for Def Pen Sports for a bit. I now cover the Hawks, the Wolves, and the Mavs. I might have to trim that down to 2 teams. I'm not sure if I'm going to do that yet, but the Mavs is probably the one I'm going biggest on this year.
Good time to do it as well. And obviously, I'm a Mavs fan, so you picked a good one there. And before that, you're a Timberwolves fan yourself, is that right?
Yeah. So when I chose my team in 2012, I knew very little about basketball. I pretty much went for teams that had cool names. So I knew the Celtics and the Lakers, so I didn't want to choose them. I didn't want to be boring. So I narrowed it down to the Timberwolves, the Spurs, and the Warriors, and I chose the one team who hasn't won a ring since 2012. Warriors have 3, Spurs have 1. So that's kind of the way it's gone.
Are you hoping that Russell can turn that around for you in the next couple of seasons, or 3 seasons, hopefully?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a GM who knows what he's doing. I think the Russell trade, regardless of what people think of him, to be able to turn Andrew Wiggins and a roster of role players into D'Angelo Russell is very impressive. We've still got Cat, and and obviously that number 1 pick that could become LaMelo Ball or Anthony Edwards. So I'm pretty hopeful. I don't know what the defense is going to look like, but the offense should be top 5. I can't see it being worse than that unless Cat or Russell gets injured for long periods. To be honest, if we were in the East, I think we could possibly push home advantage next year. I think there's that much talent on the roster. But in the West, it's going to be really hard because there's not one West team I look at other than Sacramento and think they're going to be bad.
Yeah, I think especially with Golden State coming back into it this year, I think the fight for even the 8-9 spot is going to be difficult, isn't it, next year?
Yeah, because like Golden State, the floor for them with Steph, Clay, and Draymond is probably 48, 49 wins. So they're going to be, they're not going to be sneaking in. They're going to be probably a top 4 seed, I would say. But then you've got, the Spurs didn't make it this year. I'm not ruling out Greg Popovich ever. The Suns played really well before the bubble. There's just so many good teams in the West. I don't think they'll ever abolish conferences. I wish they would, because like the Orlando Magic made the playoffs in the East. They're not a great team. The Nets made it, and they just had basically a load of role players when Kyrie went down, and the Wizards were invited to the bubble. The Wizards, the only team worse than them in the West was probably the Warriors this year. But I wish they would abolish conferences because the level of talent in the West is unbelievable.
Yeah, it's been almost like 10, 15 years now as well, hasn't there? There's been a disparity between the two conferences. The West has been clearly the leading one. I think the next couple of years is only going to get worse with people like, obviously, Luka's only 21, isn't he? And the Warriors are going to go again for another little 3-4 year run in their eyes. So I think the West is only going to get stronger. So I think I'd agree with you that they probably should. But I think financially, the owners will never agree to it, will they?
No, I think the excuse they always use as well is logistics. I don't buy that in 2020. You can get a plane anywhere. But I imagine the schedule kind of looked like you'd play every team twice. So I kind of get it, but I don't like the idea of someone being in the East and being able to stat pad with wins against bad teams. Not mention any names there, but maybe the Heat. I mean, the Heat's division, you've got the Wizards, the Hornets, and the Hawks, and you can really pad your wins there. But you look at the division for my Timberwolves, we've got the Blazers, the Jazz, amongst other teams. It's just really tough. You look at Sacramento, what they're up against next year, Lakers, Clippers, Warriors, and Suns. I mean, it doesn't seem right to me that because you're located in a place, you get a harder or easier schedule than everyone else.
Yeah, they almost seem like the league don't want to be the first league to jump out of that idea. Because also I know the NFL, obviously, we have the NFC and AFC as well. And they got a lot of stick for moving teams around in the 90s. And it's almost like the NBA doesn't want to do that. But let's carry on talking about your T-Wolves a little bit. What do you think they should do with the number 1 pick? And what do you think Golden State will do with the number 2 pick?
Yeah, to be honest, I think a lot of people are just suggesting that the Warriors can somehow trade that pick for a star. This is a really weak draft class. So I would temper the expectations on the Warriors pick, some people. I see Embiid floating around. I just don't understand why the Sixers would do that. The Sixers are going to retool. I don't think they're going to enter a rebuild. I would imagine the Warriors select, I think it'll be whoever we don't take out of Edwards and Ball. I think we will take Edwards. That would be my guess. I think the fit between Russell and Ball could work because good players can figure it out. And the thing our GM Jerson Rosas always talks about, because he came from Houston, he had Harden and Paul, who are both ball dominant guards. They make that work. But I think they'll take Edwards. I think they want more of a secondary scorer, and I think they want someone who's got some kind of defensive potential. He's big. He's not always engaged on that end, but with David Vanderpool leading our defense, I think they believe they can sort of get him on that right path. And I would imagine the Warriors take the one we don't take. What I would say is that this is not a draft where it's going to be easy to trade down. So I tweeted before the draft lottery, and I said that if you don't get the 1 or 2 pick in this draft, you're not trading down. There's no market to trade up. There's not many players worth trading up for. I think a couple of teams I could see like the Orlando Magic being quite aggressive because they need a shot creator badly. But outside of that, this is not a draft teams are going to be willing to move up. You might get teams moving up like 1 or 2 places. So the Warriors might be able to trade down and maybe the Hornets or the Bulls move up a pick. But other than that, I'm not foreseeing this draft day trade extravaganza that everyone else is.
Yeah, I think I'm on the bandwagon for a trade just because of that trade exception with obviously Andre Iguodala. I think they're desperate to use that, aren't they? They don't want to just let that expire. And I think it expires in December or January, I think. So I'm on the bandwagon. They might trade it. But yeah, I think it's more for a role player, someone who's going to be earning that $10 to $15 million range rather than a star that everyone predicts that they might get. Because I just don't think there's that number 1 or number 2 pick that everyone wants. Interesting to see that you think Melo Ball might be an option next to Russell. I'm not sure about defensively how that would work. That would be my only worry. He's not very engaged, is he, on that end?
No. Russell he's a very poor defender. I think if it wasn't for Trae Young, Russell would be considered the worst in the league. All I will say is I'm not going to sit here and say that David Vanderpool is going to turn him into Patrick Beverley or Marcus Smart, but he does have a history. So he had Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum in Portland. And I'm not saying either of those guys are amazing defenders. They're not, but he got them at least to buy in. And I think if you can get a guy putting effort in, that can really help. But you're right, the defense with Ball and Russell, you'd have to pretty much have elite defenders at the 3 and 4 to cover for that. And we don't have that because we got Malik Beasley, Juan Hernan Gomez, guys like that who are also not great on the defensive ends.
What are your thoughts on Wiseman just before we move off the draft? That's who I thought the Warriors are more likely to take just because they like that rim runner at 5, don't they? And he's got good potential. I know the tools aren't there. The shot's not quite there yet, but he's not a loony type, but he's more to that mold to play next to Draymond. I think that they could go for that if they do pick it too.
Wiseman's a very interesting prospect because draft Twitter, most of the draft guys I follow are very low on him. I think so. People talk about his defense, and when people talk about his defense, they just talk about physical tools. That's not really how defense works to me. I think it's more about intelligence. I mean, the thing with size is the best way I've seen size described on defensive prospects is that it shortens your learning curve. So yeah, if you're bigger and you're more athletic and you've got the wingspan, of course your learning curve is smaller because you don't have to do as much to make the big plays. But Wiseman, there's definitely effort concerns on that defensive end. He's not really in the right positions. But what I would say for the Warriors is it's the type of pick that he'd be in a great atmosphere to learn. I mean, Draymond Green would not tolerate him not playing defense. The only thing is, I don't know if Draymond would want to shoot himself trying to get Wiggins and Wiseman to really buy in on defense. But I could see them doing it just because they're in a position where they can take a risk like that. But again, I'm not as big on him as other people. I think there's a lot of tools there, but I'm not sold on the production. I think a Kongwu, for example, is better.
Yeah, I think Kevin O'Connor from The Ringer did say that one of their other options, obviously, like you said, to try and trade back if possible and try and pick up just a wing scorer, which kind of makes sense. But in this draft, I'm not sure who's going to actually spend that capital to try and trade up to number 2, especially knowing they can't get the pick of who they want with you guys picking ahead of them.
That's the thing. So you could have I know you're into the NFL as well, and I know in the NFL teams are very, very aggressive. So I'll use an example. In the last draft, my Seahawks traded up to take a linebacker because they heard the Ravens were going to take him. I think I could see that happen in the NBA draft where maybe I think the Hornets and the Bulls are at 3 and 4. So let's say we take Edwards and the Hornets and the Bulls have Ball at 1 on their board. They're probably jumping for joy. I could see them making a small little trade to move up. I don't know who they would throw in. I mean, maybe the Bulls could throw in a win now player. It's just the first guy that came to mind, someone like Thad Young. That's quite a nice sweetener to move down 1 spot. But I'm with you. I don't think there's going to be any major trades, people moving up 20 or 30 spots.
Yeah, or packages for 3 or 4 picks to move up to 1. I just don't think it's that draft. And I haven't studied for next year's yet, but everyone says next year's is really deep. So if you've got a big draft coming next year, I don't think you want to spend the capital to move up this year, personally. But yeah, we'll have to see. Let's move on to talk about some coaching news then. Before we started recording, I saw the news that Billy Donovan's not extending his contract with the Thunder because I think it runs out basically this month. What are your thoughts on the job that he did there, and is that a good move to move on from him, or do you think that's a bad decision by the Thunder?
I sit in the middle on Donovan. So this year there were people on Twitter talking like it was some miracle what he did. I don't buy that. He had Chris Paul, who's a top 15 player. He had a very good supporting cast of SGA, Dennis Schroeder, Steven Adams, Danilo Gallinari. They had Lou Dort off the bench. So if I was to rank Donovan as a coach, I'd probably put him between like 17 and 22. There's a lot of good coaches in the NBA. He's definitely one of them. But I'm not buying the outcry that I'm seeing on my timeline that, it's a terrible decision. He's an amazing coach. There's been better coaches who've lost their job this year. Certainly, I'd look at a guy like Nate McMillan as probably a better coach. So I think he did a good job. And I think the thing he did when he took over from Scott Brooks is he diversified the offense a bit. I remember when they beat the Spurs, Greg Popovich spoke about that, how they were harder to play against because they weren't just running. Scott Brooks just ran your turn, my turn type isolation basketball. It was very easy to play against. Donovan, I mean, he'll get another job. I think the thing is, as a college coach, obviously he coached younger players. I don't think he really ever had that at Oklahoma City. He took over a win now team. Even now, it's quite. They've got some young pieces, but it's still a mixed age type roster. So I think someone will try him for their rebuild. I mean, if I was Sacramento, I would have been on the phone already. Although they're going to stick with Luke Walton, but I think he's a decent coach.
I don't know why they're going to stick with Luke Walton, but
no, well, the weird thing there is as well, they want a new GM, so they're hiring a GM, but they're basically saying to the GMs, right, you can take the job, but you can't fire Luke Walton. So that's not really the best way to run a search. But yeah, Donovan I think he's a decent coach, but yeah, when I saw the news, I just kind of shrugged. It's not something I'm going to get up in arms about, and I've not been like that about any of the firings so far. Gentry, McMillan, Boylan. I've not really been up in arms about a firing so far. And I feel the same with Donovan. I think he did a good job, but I think it also signals as well they're going to enter a rebuild. I think Woj tweeted about how this is to cut cost, and they're not sure they with the pandemic cutting income that they're going to keep Chris Paul and keep going over the luxury tax. So I think they're going to enter a rebuild. They've got a crap load of picks. They've got SGA, who I think is a legit building block. So yeah, I'm really intrigued to sort of see what they do.
It's very rare in the NBA as well for someone to be able to fire a coach and not have to pay huge amounts of compensation. To be able to get rid of one of the highest paid coaches in the West, apparently, so we're led to believe, for free because his deal ended. That's kind of rare. Normally you have to pay the rest of the contract out. So kind of pulled in lucky there. And also I agree with everyone that's saying that Chris Paul's just going to be traded, whether it's the 76ers to the New York Knicks or whoever. I just can't see them sticking around. And as a coach, do you really want to sign a new deal if you're going into a rebuild that might take 4 years? Could do in the West. I don't think it was right for him either to stay. If I'm honest.
I don't think. Yeah, I'm with you. I don't think he would want to stay in a scenario like that. I think he's won 2 college national championships. So he likes to win. He's not. And also, I've not seen many examples of where a coach has started. So when he took over, I believe he took them to the conference finals in his first season. I can't think off the top of my head, but I can't think of a coach who has taken a team to the conference finals and then stayed for a rebuild after. I'm sure there is one, but off the top of my head, what I'm saying is it's very rare. So if he'll want to go somewhere, I think he's going to have this. I mean, Woj or Shams, I can't remember which one, tweeted pretty much straight away. His market's going to be big. New Orleans, Chicago will look at him, Philadelphia. He's going to get another job. It's just I think it's the best move for all parties involved. And my reaction to this would be different, for example, than if Mike D'Antoni didn't re-sign in Houston.
Yeah, because he's kind of. I know Darren Morey's come out and said, "Oh, we're going to stick with Mike as coach," but there's a lot of rumours that Morey won't stay if they lose to Lakers in this series. And I think if they lose Morey, I think they could move on from coach as well. And the rumours are, I think it was it Indiana that are quite keen on D'Antoni, from what I read?
Yeah, I saw that. And I don't know if you watched the game live yesterday. You probably didn't because you have job commitments, unlike me at the moment. But basically the commentators were talking about, and they got Dan Greenberg, who's one of their sort of insiders, and he said that the source from the Rocks front office is that basically, yeah, we want to get D'Antoni back. But then he quoted a source he's got close to D'Antoni. He said, well, good for Daryl Morey wanting to bring him back, but we don't know if Mike wants that yet. So it's essentially suggesting that, yeah, the Rockets do want to bring him back, but Mike D'Antoni might not want to come back. He might want to go and do something else.
Yeah, it makes sense as well. They've kind of been married to this exact system and this way of playing for, what, is it 4 years now? They've had to kind of play this small ball ISO with Hardwood. Yeah. So maybe he's fed up of that and wants to start again and not go for such heavy star basketball.
And the thing is, he's a really creative coach as well. He innovated the league in 2004, I believe he took over in Phoenix with that 7 seconds or less. No one had seen anything like that. So he's a guy, and I think the Rockets' offense in this playoffs has been diverse, but I think this is the first time I've really felt he's got the freedom to actually be a little bit more creative. I don't know whether that's because of the bubble. I don't know whether that's because he's told Morey, I'm not just going to run that every play. You need to, let me do something else other than run, a 1-5 isolation. So I wouldn't be surprised if he went as well. But that would be a disaster for the Rockets because there's no coach better to coach that team.
No, they'd have to almost rebuild their whole system after just doing it again with Westbrook. All right, cool. A couple more things I want to ask you about in terms of jobs before we move on to the series reviews. Obviously, you're a Timberwolves fan, so you were put up with Mr. Tibbs for 2 seasons, or was it 3? I'm not sure.
But 3.
Was it 3? Yeah, but he's obviously just got the Knicks job. Ben, who was my normal co-host, was quite happy for the Knicks for this one. I disagreed because I thought offensively he's just behind the times. As a Wolves fan, what's your thoughts on the hire in New York?
God. So there's a lot to unpack with Thibs. So the first thing, you're absolutely right on the offense. I remember we played the Nets once, and Jared Dudley went on Darren Wolfson's podcast. Wolfson's one of the best Timberwolves writers. And Darren Wolfson basically said, what did you think of Minnesota? And he just said they were easy to play against. The offense was antiquated. All they did was run cross screens into the post. They didn't scheme threes. Cat wasn't shooting any threes. Cat was just stood at the baseline waiting for a dump off pass or a post up. So that's one side of it. And the thing that worries me from the Knicks perspective, the Knicks roster is terrible. You've got very little room for offensive creativity there. Mike Miller did try. They ran some cool stuff out of the post with Julius Randle, little back cuts and stuff like that. But if Thibodeau couldn't be creative with Karl Anthony Towns, Jimmy Butler, Jeff Teague, Taj Gibson, guys like that, I don't know what really he's going to do with that roster because they've got loads of power forwards who can't shoot. None of their guards are particularly, Barrett and Ntilikina, I like both of them. They're not great shooters, so they haven't really got the mobility. What I will say is I think they could be a good defensive team next year. I'll give him some credit for that. I think his system's a little bit outdated on the defensive end. So what he likes to do, he likes to basically, I don't know if you've seen 300, but when the Spartans go into their like shield formation, it's just like that big clump. That's basically what his defense is, but he puts that around the paint. So protecting the paint is fine, but I lost count of the amount of times over the years that the Wolves would just be destroyed by stretch bigs because he's trying to defend the post and the paint. And actually, guys like, I'm not even talking the elite bigs, I'm talking guys like Ryan Anderson and Kelly Olynyk would destroy the Wolves because we just wouldn't close out to them. So, but I think, he's got guys like Ntilikina, he's still got Gibson, they got Mitchell Robinson, they could be a good defensive team. It's sort of from a personnel perspective, I think there was a lot of people who breathed a sigh of relief when he was fired. I'm talking journalists, players. The best quote I've seen on Thibs was, I think it was Zach Lowe asked Rip Hamilton what it was like playing for him. And he just basically sighed and went, great guy, but Jesus Christ. And that's probably the best way. He's not a terrible person, okay? I'm not sitting there saying that, but it's really difficult, I would imagine, to play for a guy like that who's that fiery. You could hear him shouting the whole game. 48 minutes just shouting at his players. that's probably grating after a while. So I was glad he was fired, and I don't even care that we went 19-45 this year. I'd rather that than Tom Thibodeau, going 31-51 with miserable basketball and the players all hating their jobs.
Yeah, and then you get a lot of player turnover, don't you, in his sort of team, just because people don't want to stick around. That was another problem that obviously in Chicago people didn't want to stick around for very long, so you're constantly churning over the roster. But also, do you think Chris Paul would be a good match to play for him in New York? Because that's kind of the rumor that everyone associates with always Knicks with big market players. He's kind of up for trade, and his contract's huge, so you might not have to give up loads to get him.
I mean, Chris, the thing with Thibodeau is like those vets, they would run through a wall for him. You only have to speak to guys like Rondo, Garnett, Pierce, who absolutely loved playing for Tom Thibodeau when he was the assistant on that championship team. So a guy like Paul, yeah, it's a good match. I don't think he ever had a guy like that in Minnesota because our best players were young and Butler had real trouble trying to get the guys to buy in on defense. So the thing with the Knicks is they say this every summer that they're going to sign all these players and they end up with Julius Randle and Wayne Ellington and Reggie Bullock. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like, if I would imagine the Thunder, just based on the way Sam Presti is, he's not just going to dump Paul somewhere like that. I can't imagine Chris Paul would want to go and play there. He's still not won a championship, but I don't think he's ever been to the finals.
No, I think he's been to the West Finals, but yeah, he's never been to the NBA Finals.
Yeah, he got there with the Clippers, I believe. He's never been to the finals. Is that going to happen in New York? I mean, I'm sure there's some Knicks fans somewhere who think so, that RJ Barrett and Taj Gibson are going to lead them to the promised land, but I can't see that happening. But I think he's got guys there who will buy into his defensive scheme, guys like Ntilikina. So I'm just low on the Knicks ever getting free agents because, as I said, we say it every year and they end up with nothing.
Yeah, that was my issue with the hire. I said that I think it was a 4-year contract, but I just said I don't think he'll be there for 2 because I think he'll get to a point where the roster is just young again. People are going to come up for extensions and might move on. And then you have to just recycle the team again. Is he going to want to stick around just to keep losing? I'm just not sure that's the problem.
Yeah, he doesn't suit a young team because his best attribute, and I will give him this, his in-game adjustments were very, very good in big games. I can't remember a team we didn't beat under him. We had one game where we absolutely blew out the LeBron, Kyrie Love Cavs at the Target Center. It was a great night, blew them out by like 30. And his tactics in that game were absolutely brilliant. But when you're coaching a young rebuilding team, you don't have many big games. Yeah, that's the reality of it. You might have a big, if you want to call it a derby against the Nets at the start of the year. But I mean, other than that, so his best attribute is kind of wasted on those teams, but no top team wanted to go near him. There's a reason that I believe that's his only job offer. I think he interviewed for a couple last summer, but there's a reason that that's his only job offer because teams don't want to go near him.
Yeah, I think the Knicks saw it as more of a culture hire, which could come to bite them really because it could develop the wrong culture with all the young players in the roster, but we'll have to see. What about the team across the bridge then? Brooklyn Nets obviously got in Steve Nash. There was a lot of and ahhing whether it was a good hire because of his obviously incredible intelligence basketball-wise, great links with the 2 stars, but no experience head coaching. What were your thoughts on that one?
I was surprised, to be honest, when I saw the Woj bomb. I thought it was a joke. I don't mean that in a bad way. I thought it'd been done by a fake account.
Fake tweet. That happens a lot with Woj.
yeah. When you're that big, you get a lot of fake accounts made about you. But I mean, I think the Nets and just what they've done. So Kenny Atkinson, for example, was a good coach, but he was more of a tactical coach. And the star players don't want that. They don't care that he could draw up a good look for a corner 3 for Torrey and Prince. They want isolation, especially those two, Durant and Kyrie. That's their game. I mean, when Durant went to Golden State, their offense changed. It was not the same. They still played good ball, but there were all those isolation touches for him at the elbow and at the low post. So I think they've brought in a guy that I would imagine he has a good relationship with Durant from when he was the player development coach with the Warriors. I think they've just brought in a guy who can coach stars, and I would imagine his assistants will do a lot of the X's and O's work if they really go down that route. They brought Jack Vaughn back. who I believe I think he's more of a defensive coach than an offensive. So they'll have a good defense again. I mean, I'm not going to criticize this hire just because I don't know much about him. I don't know what it's going to look like. I mean, Isaiah Thomas, for example, great point guard, was a terrible coach. But then you've got Doc Rivers, who was a good point guard, and he became a good coach. Didn't have much experience coming into it. So this is a hard one to predict. But, I mean, I can see the logic. I think they've just said, we're going to bring in a top 30 player of all time. He has got some experience. He's going to command their respect. He'll probably challenge them, because he's been there and he's done it. So I think that's what they've looked at. They've looked at it from more of a personnel perspective than sort of tactics and schemes.
Yeah, I think also that if we're honest, they probably even approached the two stars, haven't they, and got their perspective on hirings. And if he's got a good relationship with both of them, they've kind of done it just to keep the stars happy. We both know they can be quite outspoken if they're unhappy. So if he kind of passed the bill for them, I wonder if that's got part to play. And also the fact that there's this long-standing thing that they want to take New York from the Knicks, because the Nets still aren't, even though the Knicks have been awful for 15 years, they're still not the main team in New York. So to get Steve Nash, who's obviously one of the best players of all time, or one of the best point guards of all time, it's kind of a flashy hire as well, isn't it, to go along with the two stars?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they're going to be able to market that. If that matters to them, you could say, well, that'll get them new fans because people know who Steve Nash is. He's massive. He was an iconic figure in that sort of 2000s NBA.
Yeah, definitely. And a lot of ex-coaches have said that, not that he helped come up with the scheme, but he's very influential in team meetings, whether it come up with plays or new schemes or adjustments in game. Obviously, that's a player, so it's different to coaching. But I wonder if he can take some of that on and maybe take what he learned at Golden State into this offense. We'll have to see. I think they'll probably do well either way, no matter who was coach, because I think KD's the best player in the world. A lot of people disagree with me, but before his injury, I think he was the best player in the world. And Kyrie's probably a top 15 player, would you say, still?
Yeah, I'd have Durant top 5 and Kyrie top 15.
Yeah, so in the East, you should be winning 45, 50 games, really, with those two players, if they're fit. Obviously, they both have injury worries, so we'll have to see what happens next year. But yeah, why don't we go on talking about this year's playoffs? We can start with the East. Obviously, we'll start with last night's game. So the Heat beat the Bucks last night. They've now won the series 4-1. Butler, they won the game with Butler only taking 8 shots. And I watched this game live, and it didn't feel like he was only taking 8 shots. But it's crazy to think they can dominate a game like they did in the second half with their best player not shooting the hell out of the ball. Giannis was out injured, which was key. And now everyone's kind of wondering what's going to happen next with Giannis. What was your thoughts on the series in general? And did you think the Heat were going to do it before? I know a lot of people did.
I'll be honest, I didn't. But it was just, the series frustrated me. I said at 2-0, let me just double check myself. I'm sure they went 2-0 up, the Heat. Yeah, and game 2 was one of the worst coach games I've ever seen in my life by any coach. It's just, the thing I couldn't comprehend with the Bucks is, it's not that they were going 10-man rotation necessarily, because the Heat were also running 10-man, but the difference is the Heat were sort of spacing their guys out better. So a statistic I saw in game 1, I can't remember the exact lineup, but Bud put out a lineup that he'd never used before in the regular season. And there were none of the stars were on the court. So I think it was something like Hill, Connaughton, Korver, Marvin Williams.
As well.
DiVincenzo was the power forward. I can't remember who the center was. It might have been Giannis. But either way, why are you throwing out lineups you've never used before in the postseason? And I think it comes down to styles. So the Bucks, the best way I've seen the Bucks described is they do the same things every night and they dare you to beat them. And obviously, as a Man City fan, I can relate to that because that's how we play as well. The Heat and the Raptors, they will change up what they're doing every single night, and they'll especially Nick Nurse. He'll find a scheme that he saw like an under 11s high school girls team run, and he'll throw it at you in the conference finals. So I think the Heat, they can experiment with lineups because they play very specifically to their personnel. The Bucks play the same regardless of who's on the court. It's 5 out. It's a lot of handoffs, a lot of sort of Well, it's just 5 out. It's a spacing. It's basic, and that's fine. But the Heat just, I think, out-created them. They really outdid them, and they outplayed them for the majority of the games. I was frustrated with Pat Connaughton. He shouldn't be in a playoff rotation. I'm not trying to be harsh.
Good minutes as well. He wasn't even getting spot 2 minutes. I think he averaged 10 minutes in the first 3 games.
Yeah, and that's too many. Giannis was hitting like 33, 34 minutes. That's not enough. Butler was playing, I think, Butler average, I want to say 38, which is, that's about right. I'm not saying Giannis should go the Thibodeau 47 minutes, but he should be playing more than he is. I thought Korver and Hill looked old and slow. I don't think they had enough pace. The stat that actually interested me most is Tyler Hero he played more minutes than Duncan Robinson in this series. That really surprised me. But when you actually look at it, it makes sense because those Bucks guards just can't get near him. He's so mobile. He'll pull up from anywhere. They'll bring him off the handoffs. And I just think the Heat gave a clinic in how to build a postseason team. They had versatile defenders and shot creation. People hate on pull-up jumpers, but off the dribble creation is the most important thing in the playoffs. It's not. That's probably why Hero played more than Robinson. Robinson is great. He's going to go down as one of the best shooters to ever play the game. I'm confident of that already. But when you've got,
he's a spot-up shooter, isn't he? As well, that's the problem.
Yeah, he's a spot-up shooter. He's not a guy who is going to create off the catch. Whereas someone like Dragic, with Dragic, Hero, Butler, you've got 3 very good individual shot creators. And I've got to give a lot of credit to Eric Spoelstra because his scheming and tactics during this series. I mean, he outcoached Bud. There's no doubt about it in my mind. And it was just Spoelstra's been a genius for a while. I used to cover the Heat, and I covered them in a year where they went on a 31-10 run to finish the season after starting 10-31. And that roster had nothing. It was like Dion Waiters, James Johnson, Tyler Johnson. They were beating everyone. He's an outstanding coach, and he completely outwitted Bud.
Yeah, that was the team that got Tyler Johnson that huge contract, wasn't it? When he went over to Phoenix, I think. That was the year when he was starting point guard for them guys.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I've said I'm on a group chat. I think you're on it as well, aren't you? The NBA UK fans one. And I just could not believe the number of minutes that they were playing. They were 2-0 down at this point, and Giannis was like on pace to average 33 minutes. I know he was in foul trouble kind of throughout the series, but that's almost part of the system anyway. He's in foul trouble because he's barreling down, just running into people in the lane non-stop, and the Heat are too intelligent for you just to run down the lane and just drive into people like Butler and Crowder. They're going to know how to play that. So I just didn't understand it at all. And a lot of Hawks fans did say that this was kind of the similar picture when he was in Atlanta. It was kind of, great regular season team because we're doing the same thing every night. We've got a deep rotation. Everybody knows what to do. We can beat the bad teams. But then when it comes to playoff basketball, it was kind of like, no in-game adjustments, playing 10, 11-man rotations even then. And I just don't think he suits this team. And I wonder what they're going to do going forward, whether they're going to move on from him or whether if Giannis decides to leave, whether that'll just decide the fate of Coach Bud anyway, if he loses his star player.
I would say to the Atlanta fans, he did win 60 games with a backcourt of Jeff Teague and Kyle Korver. I will say that. I think he overachieved in the regular season with those teams, but there's absolutely no doubt that in these playoffs, and last year he was bad as well. Nurse outcoached him in the playoffs last year. He was throwing all these schemes at him, and Bud just did not know what to do. But I don't think they'll fire him, and I don't think they should fire him myself. I think they need to make some roster changes. I would move either Middleton or Bledsoe. I would lean Middleton. I don't think and this is controversial because I do get, obviously he's part of my writing. I follow a lot of numbers guys. It's not just numbers guys. There's a lot of very smart people who think Middleton's a very good player. My issue with him is that he's not got much burst to his game. He's not got that speed. He's a tough shot maker. The issue is in the playoff. The tough shot making is important. Go and watch Jason Tatum. If you go and watch all of Kobe Bryant's game-winning shots, they weren't wide open corner threes. He was shooting a fadeaway with 2 guys in his face. So it's important. But if that's all you've got to your game in the playoffs, you're going to limit your team. I think Bledsoe is easier to move though, because I think what Bledsoe is good at, we've got a lot of defensively deficient guards in this league. We've got guys like Lillard, Trae Young, D'Angelo Russell, Devin Booker. Bledsoe's the perfect guy to put alongside one of them because he's a great defender. He moves well off the ball. He's not an amazing shooter. He's a good. So this is kind of getting to what I'm talking about. So Bledsoe, for example, he shoots very well on pull-up threes, but he doesn't shoot well on spot-up threes. That's not a good fit with Giannis because
you're just getting kicked out on you all the time.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not defending Giannis. His comments about home advantage were embarrassing because everyone is going through that. Do you know what I'm saying? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like,
that was almost like a LeBron comment. As much as everyone loves LeBron, I've kind of got a thing about some of the stuff he says. That was like a LeBron level comment where I was thinking, come on, Giannis, you've been the best player probably in the league for 2 years. To come out with that, it's kind of like, that's irrelevant, isn't it? It's just a bit of a Crimea River story.
Yeah, it is. And I think, I'm not going to sit here and defend Giannis and Bud from this series because it's bad. It was not a good series for either of them. But I would make some roster moves, and I think that could push them over the edge. I would Bledsoe or Middleton for me. I would imagine they'll choose Bledsoe.
Just because getting rid of Brogdon was the issue, though, wasn't it? I think he was perfect for the scheme. And
they did that to cut costs as well, which has got to hurt the fans. Yeah, they did that because the owner didn't want to pay the luxury tax. Because Brogdon's contract in Indiana, I mean, it wasn't massive. People are acting like he's getting paid $22 million a year. I'll look up the exact contract. It's not that much. I know the Bucks could have afforded it. So
and you're worried about paying the luxury tax just when you're about to pay Giannis. You should be paying Giannis a supermax. Like, the luxury tax shouldn't even come into your thinking, to be honest. Not this early.
No, and I think, the thing with Brogdon was he was a 50-40-90 guy, which is like the elite clubs. That's 50% field goal percentage, 40% free, 90% free throws. There's not many in that club. I think Dirk made it a couple of times. Curry,
Middleton nearly did, didn't he?
Yeah, Middleton was very, very unlucky not to make it. But those are the guys you want alongside a guy like Giannis. Giannis is never going to be a good shooter. He added as Mo Moonsey did in his video breakdown, he added a post fadeaway this year, which was helpful. I think that's the best you're going to get from him. So you need guys alongside him who can spot up. And I think Bud knows this because that was why Kyle Korver was playing so many minutes. I love Kyle Korver. I've loved him for a long time, but he's old. You can't run him for that long in a playoff series. And I think the fact he was playing so many minutes is proof of that Bud just could not find that extra creation and the spacing that he needed.
No, definitely. Do you see Giannis staying long term? Obviously, he's got 1 year left, so I think people think he might extend early this year or ask for a trade if he wants to leave this year. But I don't think either of those are going to happen. But after this year, do you see him going on a free agent tour and then leaving, or do you think he'll take the extra year and the crazy money and stay?
I think he'll stay. I'm not going to lie to you. They're close. They're close to winning it. Just I think a few little tweaks, and they can absolutely win the championship. It's not like this is like an old sort of one and done type roster. There's definitely potential here. They draft relatively well, which is important for that sustainability. It depends how next season goes. I think I'll have a better answer for you after next season. But I think if they're pushing, if they make the finals, I think he'll stay. He loves his teammates, but the thing is with stars, I thought Kevin Durant loved his teammates in OKC. So it's really difficult to call. My gut instinct is he stays.
Okay, cool. And then quickly a bit more on the Heat before we move on. Do you think the Heat are a little bit like last year's Raptors in terms of a lot of people that can create their own shot, a lot of people that can score in bunches, and probably 3 or 4 elite defenders? Do you see them similar to last year's Raptors at all, or not quite?
Similar in the fact that I think they're an underdog. Play style slightly different, but the Heat are definite underdog, and this is the thing with Jimmy Butler is if you want to be an underdog, he's the perfect star because that's the way he plays. I love the way he played in Minnesota. I didn't like the way it ended, but I don't think that was on him in hindsight. They've just targeted a great band of players. They got their vets. They're not playing Iguodala much, which I think is telling. I think he's finished, but they got guys like Jay Crowder. Jay Crowder had a great season. He was one of the big reasons Memphis were a surprise package. So yeah, I just think they have been constructed absolutely perfectly. They've got rangy defenders, they've got 3-point shooting, but the most important thing is they've got those shot creators. Dragic has been brilliant in the playoffs.
Yeah, he has. He's kind of turned into the stereotypical FIBA Dragic, hasn't he? When he goes away with Slovenia, he kind of runs their team before Luka, obviously. And he's kind of just taken over, isn't he, this playoffs? He wasn't even starting for most of the season. I think he was behind Kendrick Nunn.
Yeah, he was their sixth man, I believe.
Yeah, he was, yeah. And they kind of flipped it after Kendrick Nunn missed the bubble. And I think Spurs made a great decision there. And Dragic is averaging like 6 more minutes than he did in the regular season. So, yeah, I think that was a good move. Obviously, they're through to the final East Conference Finals now. We're not sure who they're going to play. The Celtics are 3-2 up against the Raptors. And for me, another disappointing game from Siakam. I think he scored 10 points in 29 minutes. I'm not sure that he is good enough to lead this team. I know Lowry is technically the leader, but Siakam's your star, and I just don't think he can score at a high enough level. And then this series in general, 88% of teams that win Game 5 when tied 2-2 go on to win the series. So for me, I said Celtics before it started. I think I'm going to carry on with the Celtics. But what are your thoughts on the series? Do you think the Raptors can come back from 3-2 down now, or do you think that could be game over?
I think it's over, to be honest with you. I looked at some numbers before I came on. So the Raptors in the regular season, they were a fantastic transition team. That's where they got most of their points. They weren't great in the half court. I thought they would improve that in the playoffs, but their offensive rating in half court possessions in this series is 83.9. That's the worst in the playoffs of any team. That's only one series. So they were good against Brooklyn, but it's Brooklyn. They are really, really struggling. And this is the thing with Kawhi is Kawhi generated most of their half-court offense last year because, again, he's that tough shot maker I talk about. That guy who can hit the contested shots, that guy who draws double teams. Siakam's a great player. I'd have him top 20, possibly top 25-ish. He's not a guy I would have running as my number one offensive option. And team ball is fantastic in theory, but you do need that star to create consistently in the half court. Yeah, I'm looking at the other teams who have the high numbers. Miami, they've got Butler, obviously the Lakers and the Clippers. Boston's is a fair chunk better. So Boston, obviously, they've got multiple guys who can make those shots. The Raptors are extremely well coached, and I think that's been their sort of selling point this year, is that Nick Nurse can throw anything at you. I just don't think they've got quite enough on the offensive end to do this. Defensively, they're very good, but you look at the games they won, an OG Anunoby crazy shot was one of them. So
yeah, I think Norman Powell got like 4 threes in the fourth quarter in the other game they won, which is not something you're going to bank on. Obviously, no. Game by game, is it? That's the problem.
Yeah, I think that's what they've been reliant on. It's like one guy going off. But last year, Kawhi was consistently great. Tatum has been consistently great in these playoffs. So, yeah, this has been a good season for Toronto, but I had Boston before just because I didn't think that Toronto would be able to create in the half court, and I've not been proven wrong. Something that's interested me in the fallout is if this affects Fred VanVleet's free agency, because all the talk before was that he was going to get like $25 million a year. I tweeted the other day saying that whoever pays him is going to regret it, because I don't think he's worth that money. I'd pay him Brogdon. So Brogdon got 20 a year. I'd pay him that. 25 plus to me is suggesting that you're going to have this guy run your offense, that he's going to be one of your superstars. And I don't think he's at that level. And I think that's proven by the fact that their half-court numbers are so bad.
There's a lot of people as well that are throwing out not even the 2025. They're talking max contract, aren't they? Fred VanVleet.
Yeah,
that's the worry.
If someone matches Fred VanVleet, they deserve all the terrible records that come to them. I like him. He was an undrafted guy. I remember scouting him when he was at Wichita State. I said he would become a good role player. I'm talking like a 10th or 11th man. I didn't foresee this. My gut is I actually think this might play into Toronto's hands because they can bring him back a little bit cheaper. I think his market would have gone down quite a bit. I would imagine teams like Detroit, New York would be lining up to take a run at him. I'm wondering now if they're just taking a step back. They'll probably still put an offer in for him, But, if you're talking like, oh, yeah, I'm going to get 19 million a year from the Pistons, or I can get 15 from the Raptors and go back there and, be on a winning team, I'd imagine he'll take the pay cut.
Yeah, I think so. I think he likes the team environment there, doesn't he? Which is another thing. But if a team like the Knicks do chuck a max at him, that gets to the point where you kind of could see him thinking family first and just saying, right, I'm going to take the max and just see what happens. Because we all know after 2 years, if you want to get traded out, you can get traded out. But we'll have to see. Obviously, Game 6 is this evening. What are your thoughts? Do you think it'll be another Celtics win, or do you think we could get it to a Game 7?
I think the Celtics will win pretty comfortably. I felt that. The thing is, some of these games have been really close, but they've not felt it. I think it was Game 2, the Celtics won by 3, and that I thought the Celtics absolutely dominated them in that game. But the Raptors are one of those teams who don't go away, which is why they were so good last year, because they never got outplayed, and Kawhi was just enough to take them over. I don't think they've got that guy who can just bridge the gap from being a close loss to a win. So, yeah, I'm confident Boston finish it off tonight. The key for them has been that Jason Tatum has developed as a playmaker. So when the Raptors are throwing those box and one schemes at him and the blitzes, he can punish it now.
Yeah, and another thing with Jason Tatum was 2 years ago, obviously, he was just driving to the basket and struggling to even finish layups, whereas now he's got stronger around the rim, so he doesn't have to just pull up and take these crazy three-pointers. He can kind of distribute and get to the rim, which just gives him he's almost a perfect player, really, because he's improving on the defensive end as well, so he can kind of get any shot he wants. And with Marcus Smart having the random game of 4 or 5 three-pointers as well, I just think that the Celtics can be too good. And also with the Raptors having to rely on Marc Gasol. I don't know what you think about Marc Gasol, but this playoffs has been one of the worst performances I've seen from a centre in a long time, and I think he's done, isn't he?
Yeah, I think what they've struggled with is Marc Gasol's never been mobile. So at Memphis, he pretty much used to sit in the paint. And last year in the series they had, he was able to do that because against the Warriors in the finals, they had Draymond. They didn't use him as much outside as they have before. Obviously, they used the zone and the box and one in the Milwaukee series, which is why he could sit inside. He has struggled. Even though Daniel Tice isn't a great shooter, they still use him. It's not about being able to shoot. It's just about the mobility and the handoff actions they use. So he's struggled badly. That's another guy whose free agency has probably been a little bit affected because I think he would have. I still think he's going to get a nice contract somewhere, but it's probably knocked him down a little bit. I saw him linked with the Pelicans and the Warriors. I thought they both could have done with him. The Warriors still might take a look at him, to be honest, but he's struggled badly. He looks out of place on a couple of times, but then again, you've got to remember, this is a guy who at Memphis he played grit and grind. He had long, heavy minutes, and now he's being asked to go out onto the perimeter and at times switch on to guys like Kemba Walker. It's gonna be hard.
Yeah, the way they play offensively as well. So they want to get out in transition and run a lot, don't they? And that's just not going to suit someone that has his lack of mobility and obviously just his age. And he did have a couple of knee injuries as well, didn't he, when he was at Memphis? So
yeah,
maybe time's just caught up with him. But yeah, no, I agree with you. I think it ends tonight. I think that Jason Tatum's just too good, and Kemba Walker can kind of get any shot he wants. So then that'll be an exciting Heat Celtics Eastern Conference Finals. And then moving on to the West, we saw the Lakers and the Clippers both take 2-1 advantages in their series. We'll start with the Lakers. What are your thoughts on the series in general? Do you think Houston can get back into it, or do you think that Game 1 was just similar to the Blazers series and it was more of a feel-out game for LeBron?
I still think the Rockets can push to win this series, to be honest. I think they've played very well I thought they were really good in Game 2 and they were actually quite unlucky. I think the thing last night was that he used Rondo a lot more. So when Rondo was on the court, the Lakers had an offensive rating of 151. And what Rondo being on there does is it means LeBron can play off ball, not in terms of shooting, but LeBron was just getting open under the rim quite often because that's where the size comes in. So I tweeted, I can't remember when it was, 2 or 3 days ago, that posting up AD on Tucker's a trap. This is how you attack a small lineup. You don't do it with post-ups because PJ Tucker, height doesn't matter on post-ups. It's about strength and core strength. So you're not going to beat PJ Tucker in the post unless you're like Manute Bol or George A. Murasan. Do you know what I mean? You just don't have that advantage. But LeBron was just sealing under the rim for lobs. That lob was there every play. So, Rondo was excellent. And they just, the thing I noticed on offense as well is that the Rockets, if Harden gives the ball up, he's out of the possession because he just kind of stands at the top of the key. And for the Lakers, so spacing isn't just about having people on the three-point line. It's about functional spacing, which kind of means that so Harden just being stood that deep, that's not functional spacing because the Lakers can sag off him, and because they know if he's that deep, they've got an extra second to get out to him. And if Harden's going to make a 32-footer, you live with that. So when Harden's off the ball, the Lakers are still able to pack the paint in a 5-man formation. And that's really difficult for guys like Westbrook, Gordon, especially Gordon. He's been terrible in these playoffs. It's been really difficult for them to get going.
Yeah, they kind of needed him, didn't they, to be the third kind of facilitator, especially when Harden was off the floor rather than Westbrook just kind of running and barreling down the lane all the time. But his shooting has been awful, Aaron Gordon. And he's struggling to get to the free throw line as well. So he did quite well last year against the Warriors. But this year, he's just been almost anonymous for them. And in terms of Rondo, like I said, I think he was 8 from 11 from the field in Game 3, which is just, you kind of expect him to facilitate, don't you? You don't expect him to get 8 from 11. I think he was 2 from 3 in the fourth quarter as well. And that's just not something you expect to get from Rondo game in, game out.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. That's why I'm confident for the Rockets. They probably know that Rondo isn't going to go 8 of 11 and 3 from 5 from beyond again. But they've got to sort out those lobs. Because that's why I was pushing for the Lakers to play big, so they can get these lobs constantly. So people will sort of say, oh no, the Lakers went small. They didn't. If you got LeBron James in the paint, that's not going small. If you got LeBron and AD out there, that's not small.
Especially compared to the Rockets.
Yeah, I understand McGee and Howard aren't playing, but the way the Lakers are attacking them is not by spacing the floor and jacking up threes or going in the post. It's just those lobs. They're really difficult to stop. And I think I'm still confident in the Rockets. I'm not going to argue against anyone taking the Lakers. I'm still backing the Rockets to come and win this series.
Yeah, I think me and Ben on the podcast had it, 4-3, I think both of us to the Lakers. So we kind of saw it going quite deep, but it's kind of hard, isn't it, not to trust LeBron to see out a tough series. But I think the key for the Rockets as well is that they need to find a way past the Lakers on the other end, because the Lakers' rotation has been phenomenal, hasn't it? They've been getting out to shooters quite well. And they need to try and kind of find another way, whether it's Russell getting to the free throw line more, or maybe James Harden getting more involved in the fourth quarter. I'm not sure how they do it, but they need to kind of try and break that Lakers rotation.
Yeah, I think the key is Harden's got to be a little bit more involved off ball, because it's very difficult for Westbrook to drive to the paint when there's just 5 people in there.
Mm-hmm.
I still think the Rockets can keep doing what they're doing on offense, but I think the issue they've got is that Oroko's not a shot creator. Gordon is meant to be that guy, but you're right, he's just not playing like that at all. So I think that's what's hurting them, is they don't have the third guy who can sort of collapse the defense, take over. You've got Jeff Green, who, by the way, is playing really well as that small ball center when he comes in. He's been excellent throughout the series, but I still think the Rockets have got enough on the offensive end. I think Harden's playing really well. They just need... I think the key to this team... I'll never forget the Game 7 against the Warriors 2017, where they were... Luke Mbah-a-Moute and Trevor Ariza were a combined 0 for 24 from 3. And that has always been the thing for the Rockets. They've always had the high-powered backcourt and the good big man, whether it's Tucker or Capella. They need the 3 and the 4 to kind of do a lot, and often they don't. They don't quite bring enough.
No, they have to kind of work hard defensively, don't they, as well? The 3 and the 4 in that team have kind of always been the ones that have done heavy rotation on the best players from the other team. And that's kind of no different now, because they're asking Covington, aren't they, to kind of try and guard LeBron at times. And I think they just demand too much sometimes from the person who more plays the 3, in my opinion. But also, speaking about Robert Covington, he's expected to play in Game 4 as well, which is crucial to them, isn't it? Because I think he left the last game. I think he had a collision. I don't know who it was with. I think he got an elbow. but he's due to play in game 4, and that's crucial because I think if he wasn't playing in game 4, I'd be really worried about their chances. But with him, I think he's averaging like 3 blocks a game at the moment. He's kind of just become a bit more of a defensive stopper like he was. I think he when he played for the Timberwolves, he was like that, wasn't he?
He's an outstanding defender, top 5, top 10 in the league. He was great for us. His best attribute is sort of off ball. So if teams are trying to run ball screens, he blows them up. He's very well suited to. There's no such thing as a LeBron stopper, but Covington is better against bigger forwards than he is against smaller guards. So guys like CJ McCollum and Kemba Walker used to cause him problems. But against guys like LeBron, Kawhi, George, Doncic, Tatum, he can hold his own against those guys.
Yeah, so that'd be crucial for trying to guard LeBron in game 4. All right, then moving to the next series then. The final one for the West, obviously. Clippers versus the Nuggets. I was kind of on record thinking this would be a 4-1 Clippers win, to be honest. I saw the Nuggets winning the game just because the Clippers kind of take nights off. That's what everyone kind of says about their championship material. They're not quite locked in game by game. But how do you see the rest of the series going? And obviously we've got game 4 this evening. The Nuggets need to win, I think, tonight, and they need a big game from Murray to stand a chance to do so.
Yeah, Denver are another team struggling to create in the half court. They run really good offense, but the Clippers just have so much length to break up all the screens they run that, it's not just Kawhi, it's George, it's Marcus Morris. All those guys just have so much length that they can bring. And it's just been really difficult for Denver to really get into their half court sets. And the scary thing with the Clippers is that they're not always kind of locked in on defense, but they had a spell at the end of game 3 where Denver just could not hit anything. And that was just because Kawhi, George, Beverly, all those guys were locked in. Anytime Murray was trying to come off a screen, they were switching it perfectly. And then you had Zubac just stood inside the paint. I mean, they've been scarily good at times, but the thing with like Denver and Jamal Murray is I think they need more. Someone else needs to step up as a scorer. Whether it's Michael Porter Jr. I mean, the thing with MPJ is at the moment he's a very poor decision maker, and this Denver offense is all about kind of sharing the ball, moving off ball, being unselfish, making a cut to free up a teammate rather than yourself. And MPJ just doesn't quite have that court vision yet, but he's a guy they need to step up. My worry for Denver is that Jeremy Grant, they're asking him to do too much. Jeremy Grant is not a good offensive player. If you want a guy who can hit a corner 3, fine, Grant's your man. But they're getting him to attack downhill. That's not his game. 5-14 in the last game. His career numbers sort of finishing around the rim and from those short mid areas. Short mid finishing is a good indicator of sort of touch and feel for the game. He's not good in those areas. So if you're asking him to play 42 minutes and run your offense, that's a sign to me that you're struggling for creation.
Yeah, I think in game 2 as well, I watched he missed 4 corner 3s in a row. And if he's not hitting those corner 3s for the kickouts, when obviously Jokic is facilitating with the ball, I just think he's almost a nil, isn't he, on offense at that point? I know he's a great defender, so it's hard to, obviously, you're not going to not play him minutes, but they need to try and get his hand, get him away from the ball as much as possible. And if they can try and get Gary Harris somehow involved more on that end rather than Grant, I think that could help them. Not that he's a great offensive player, but I just think compared to Grant, he can give you a little bit more on that end.
Yeah, I think the reason they give Harris a lower role on offense is because he is their most important defender, other than Millsap. But he got no All NBA votes. I would have had him in my team, let alone I'd done second team, let alone getting votes. He's excellent in the passing lanes, a very big player. So part of me wonders if that factors into his offensive role. That they don't really want to overwork him. But either way, they need to find an alternative to Grant. I think it's MPJ. I know I said his decision making isn't the best, but he is an all-out scorer. He's reminds me a lot of Kevin Durant because he's got that such high release point. He's very hard to block, and I think they've got a real player there. But to me, I'm looking at this minute distribution. Jeremy Grant 42 and Porter 23 last game. They've got to try and even that out. I know Grant's a great defender, but if your offense is struggling to get going, you can't just rely on Jamal Murray hitting everything. You have to have something else because those high usage guards, they can get into these ruts in the playoffs. We've seen it with Harden over the years. If you're just asking them to take shot after shot and they're not involved, those players really can find it hard to break out of the cold streaks.
Yeah, I agree, but I also think as well they need to try and find a way to hide Porter on defense as much as possible. So I think that's why they're limiting his minutes. I think everyone kind of knows he struggles really on the defensive end. He really struggles with his rotation, like knowing where to be at times.
Yeah.
And I think if they can try and hide him on that end a little bit, it might give them a bit more encouragement to play him more minutes because you can see the reason why. It's because when he's on the court, yeah, he looks like he's going to get a shot on one end, but whoever he's guarding on the other is very likely to get a free shot against Denver. So I just think that Malone wants to kind of hide that. And I think if they can't find a way to hide it, they're going to struggle to get him involved. But without that, I agree with you. I just think that you're asking Jokic and Murray to almost do too much in the two-man game, which is not going to be efficient enough against a team that's got 3 or 4 really good scorers like LA.
No, you're right. And I think, you talk about hiding defenders there. The Clippers do that well with Williams and Harrell, who are both, well, they're diabolical defenders, both of them. Harrell especially. That's why I didn't like when he was trash talking from the bench in the Maverick series, because he was played off the court by Boban Marjanovic and Maxi Kleber. You can't talk when that's the case, but I think it comes down to scheme. So the Denver scheme is very, very demanding because Jokic blitzes, and what that requires. So blitz is basically where when the guy's running pick and roll, instead of dropping into the paint, he will actually push up and disrupt them. But what that requires is the wings and the guards to cover into the paint. So that's probably why MPJ doesn't play, because that requires, MPJ's got the length, but I said earlier about Wiseman, but having length and size doesn't make you a good defender. That's just not how it works. But guys like Harris and Grant, they do make those rotations very, very well and cover into the paint, and Millsap. So that's probably why. But I just think at times coaches, if they see a defensive problem, they'll fix it straight away. But if there's an offensive problem, I think they can be slow to react.
Yeah, whether they can almost trust their players too much on the offensive end and just think, oh, well, we've got arguably the best centre in the league. We've got Murray, who's a really good guard. Oh, I'm sure they can figure it out on offense, when really I think you kind of need to scheme more, especially against a team like the Clippers, because like we said, they've got 3 elite wing defenders, so it's tough. Do you think an answer could be to blitz less with Jokic to try and hide MPJ more on that end, or do you just think that that's the way they play and they're not going to swap that now?
I think the issue is with using Jokic in a drop. He even admits this himself, when he says, I have to pass because I can't move. If you're playing in drop coverage, it's not about speed, but it's about agility and change of direction. And Jokic doesn't have either of them. So the best drop defender for me is Clint Capella, because he can change his direction like a click of the fingers. He's very athletic, very fast, and he puts that into practice. It's going to be really hard to run Jokic in the system like that. So in a way, by hiding Jokic, there's an inability to hide other players.
Yeah, I think Jokic is probably one of the worst starting centers I've seen defensively, isn't it? I think it's just more of his body type and the way he plays basketball. Like you said, he's not very agile, and he really struggles against those small guards, and people like Lou Williams will have a field day if you start trying to do drop coverage against Jokic.
Yeah, his best attribute is his strength. That's why he plays well against Embiid, because Embiid tries to kind of bully him. It doesn't work. And that's the way to beat Embiid, is guys like Gasol and Jokic, who are just so powerful, you can't get past them. But Cat, it's weird. The center relationships are the best 3 centers. It's like rock, paper, scissors. You've got Embiid, who owns Cat owns Jokic, and Jokic owns Embiid. But when we play them, Jokic he just cannot deal with Cat on the perimeter, because he just blows past him. He shoots, he pulls him outside the paint, and the blitzing doesn't work because we can just dump it off to a 40% 3-point shooter. So it's just a weird relationship between those 3 bigs, but they definitely do a good job of hiding him. Denver, Michael Malone is probably the most underrated coach in the league for me. He's certainly better than Billy Donovan. You wouldn't think it based on going on Twitter in the last 12 hours, but he's done a fantastic job with this team. I think I said in the group chat I could watch Denver play all day. It's proper basketball. There's none of this like, isolation crap. It's team ball. Everyone's unselfish. I could watch it all day.
Yeah, they do coach a good scheme to defend. You can see them almost wanting to go away from ISO. You know, when Murray gets hot sometimes, you can see Malone trying to call plays to almost try and get other people involved, which is quite rare, isn't it? In like modern day NBA terms. But in terms of this series, obviously 2-1 at the moment, like we said. Where do you see it going? Do you see that Clippers win like me and Ben originally saw, or you think it might go more 6-7 games?
I've got Clippers in 6. I think Denver are going to push it. I mean, even game 3, they were up by 4 heading into the fourth quarter. It was just that basically Beverly came in and they completely shut that game down. So I think, yeah, Clippers in 6. They've just got too much. I mean, Dallas found this out. Dallas made some really good adjustments in that series. Carlisle outcoached Rivers in a few games, but talent just pushes you through. And you look at some of the guys they're bringing off the bench. I mean, they got JaMychal Green playing 14 minutes. JaMychal Green's a really good player. He'd be playing 30, 35 on some other pretty good teams. So their depth is insane. I just don't think Denver have enough on offense. I think the defense is good, but they basically are going to need massive games from one of the role players. You know Murray's going to play well. He's not going to shoot 5-17 again. But I think what can push them over the edge is going to have to be MPJ, Harris, Monte Morris. One of those guys is going to have to step up and probably hit 25 or 30 points on pretty good efficiency.
Yeah, I agree. And I think in terms of the series as a whole, if they don't win game 4, just for me, there's no chance. I just don't think you're going to take 3 of the last 4 games off them to try and come back. So if the Nuggets do want to win and do want to stay in this series, I think tonight they need to win. All right, well, we spoke about each series then. Obviously, you haven't been on the podcast before. So what are your thoughts overall? Who do you see winning the championship? Obviously, I know different series at different points, but in your opinion, from this point, who are your favourites to go on and win the whole thing?
God, it's tough. I mean, I can't look past the Lakers with the way LeBron's playing.
And do you think they'll be playing the Heat, maybe, or the Celtics in the finals?
That's a tough series to call. I would go with the Heat because I think a lot of what the Celtics have done in this series is, as you said, attacking Marc Gasol. You can't attack Bam on the perimeter because he's just an outstanding perimeter defender. So I think the Heat can neutralize a lot of what Boston does. I wonder if Butler and Crowder can kind of get under Tatum's skin. But Kemba v. Dragic could be the matchup because neither of those guys are great defenders, so they could end up torching each other. I'd lean Heat right now. I'd lean Heat Lakers for the finals. I'd back the Lakers just because they got LeBron. I know it sounds cheesy, and also a lot of the Heat go small a lot, so a lot of those lobs you see with AD and Bron in there, that can exploit the Heat. Not quite as much, but it can cause them problems.
I think that would be quite a good storyline as well, wouldn't it, for LeBron to be against the Heat in the finals for the Lakers this year? I think that would be quite a cool story for like the neutral fan as well.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, cool. All right, mate. Well, thank you very much for coming on. I think we'll leave it there. Did you want to tell everyone your Twitter handle and where they can find your writing?
Yeah, so my Twitter handle is at Hulbert Joe, Hulbert, and then Joe. And you can find my work at SB Nation's Peachtree Hoops or Canis Hoopus. And I've just started at the Maverick Fans for Life. So I'm writing an article on who they should target free agency. It should be up, I'd say, on Thursday or Friday.
As I say, I'm looking forward to reading that because I think we're strapped for cash, but we definitely need a couple of players to try and take the roster over the edge. So I look forward to reading that. And everyone else, so go follow Joe because you do some really cool video breakdowns which can help people. Anyone who's just joined like the NBA UK community, Joe's a good follow for that. So make sure you go check his stuff out. Well, cool, mate. Enjoy the playoffs tonight. I'm sure you'll be staying up. And thanks again for joining us.
No problem. Thank you.